Welcome to Dead Genre Chronicles, and the book club style podcast about a genre of games as dead as the Elu. Every month, DGC will be playing through a JRPG decided on by the hosts, and we invite you to play along and send us your questions and thoughts on it. I'm your host, Devin, and you can find me on Twitter as Invisible or on my games criticism blog, The Silver Grinding. For co-hosts this month, we're only sporting 2, but if 3 people can save Phil Gaia, I think we can handle a podcast. With me, I have LeeRoy and RJ.
Hello. LeeRoy?
Oh, hello.
Speak to us, man. Speak to us.
Yeah, you're here.
I thought we were gonna sign in. I thought RJ was gonna have a spiel.
Well, I mean, you're
I
regulars.
could do a spiel.
You're regulars. They know you.
Yeah,
I guess
then
that's
on
true.
Twitter, find me. I'd link everything. It's
Yeah,
fine.
we'll do that at the end. On this episode, we're going to be discussing Wild Arms, a PlayStation 1 JRPG that I can't really describe the setting or plot of without treading on the topics we're going to have. So let's get to talking about it. What did you think of
Wait,
this game?
it's a Western, right?
Yeah, it's a Western.
it
of
tries
sorts.
so hard to be a Western.
Yeah.
What it actually is a tech demo for the PS1. And I think it starts off as a tech demo for the PS1, and the first 10 hours or so I really struggled to engage with.
Yeah, the first third of the game basically is really just empty. It's an SNES RPG on better hardware.
I mean, I would say it's just always empty. Just eventually you start to feel the tempo of it, and you let the emptiness inside you.
You can tell you're a metal fan. The emptiness inside.
Yeah, I am a metal fan.
But actually, that kind of the theme of emptiness, I think, is one of the things that actually worked for me looking back on it. Because when we think of westerns as a genre, one of the things we think of is kind of big empty spaces and nothing happening for ages. Like the opening of Once Upon a Time in the West is about 5 minutes of just almost still shots.
And the notorious tumbleweed in the shot.
That is a bit, yeah. But I mean, that kind of, the ways this engages with westerns and doesn't, it is quite interesting. Because, all through the month that we've been playing this, we've been talking about, it's not a western. It's not a western. But, what westerns are you thinking of when you say that?
When I say that, I'm not overtly familiar with westerns. All I know is Clint Eastwood spaghetti western, very topical. Really just that image of western.
Yeah, because the thing is, that's a kind of latter day image of the western, right? That's kind of 50s, 60s films, 40s, 50s. But westerns before that have been lots of very different things. And you go back far enough, it's not so much about kind of bandits and outlaws and this very amoral thing.
And a duel at high noon kind of deal.
There's High Noon, and there's also the Stagecoach type western.
Yeah.
Where it's about white American settlers in Native American lands, which is a horribly racist thing, but is also much more about hostile space and this invasive other that's a deadly savage threat. And I realised going through the game that it picks up much more on that older tradition of westerns, because the whole first bit of the game, the setup is there are these 3 statues. Each one's in a remote town, and you're supposed to defend these statues from the invading demon hordes. And every time you get to the town, and either the demons have got there first and trash the place, or they show up shortly after you and trash the place because you can do nothing about them.
Mm-hmm.
Because JRPG mechanics really don't suit defending places. I think this is something we saw last month with Live Alive as well.
Yeah, the Western was about defending stuff as well.
You're defending, and the stuff you do in that chapter that defends the town doesn't do any. It's just not JRPG stuff at all. It's like a puzzle game.
Yeah.
And here we see why, because if you a JRPG where you defended something, you'd just be standing in place, fighting wave after wave of random encounters.
Well, I mean, they gave you plenty of wave after wave of random encounters in Wild Arms, but
They did. But the this defending a town against a hostile outsider, that's a very Western thing. It's just an older Western thing, and the game doesn't do a good job of it because it doesn't have the mechanics to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So I found something that's a Western in there besides, like, cowboy hats and ponchos.
But then the second and third bits of the game happen, and that kind of falls to the wayside.
I've started to just kind of shrug and say, if it wants to be called a Western, we can just let it be a Western.
A lot of things have gone under the label Western over the years, but I don't know how generous we should be to this one.
Yeah, I mean that's true, but it's like it's not really a successful work of fantasy or sci-fi either for all it tries to do.
It's a giant coagulating mess.
So defaulting to maybe the smaller moments or letting its emptiness kind of, define that Western aesthetic, I'm just like, okay, Wild Arms, maybe that's what you're doing, maybe.
Give it kind of a pat on the head, like, you tried. We'll give you a medal.
Well, there are, like, on specifically, like, small moments of emptiness, there are a couple of really powerful moments of emptiness I found in the first part of the game, where after a town has been attacked, there's one where the entire town is deserted.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually did find that chilling. But even more powerful than that, I think it's the first town that gets attacked. I can't remember any of the town names. I think it's the first town that gets attacked.
The first town's
Only
Idlehyde.
some of the people die. So, like, the shopkeeper's still there, and the innkeeper's still there, and the guy who recharges your weapons is still there. But some of the people who are in the kind of non-functional houses, the houses that are just there for set dressing, aren't anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking into one of these houses, and there was nobody there. It was just like, oh, that kind of worked. I kind of feel it now.
Yeah, the music cue has also changed when you're in the dilapidated town. It does not return back to the castle theme until you donate money and rebuild the town.
Which is kind of a silly thing. Like, I don't know what JRPGs have with, like, the fascination with money sinks of rebuilding towns.
It's actually kind of frustrating that they let you... I mean, they just kind of really pull their weight, their punch there, when they let you rebuild the town that was... kind of a prize.
This place got ruined, but if you grind enough with your JRPG skills, you can just replace the entire thing. Everyone's alive again.
You can fix what's broken, basically, all over and over again. And actually, there is another...
It's, like, the thresholds for actually doing that are really low as well. Like, it doesn't really cost anything.
Until you get up to the later tiers where it's like, 100,000, that's a lot.
Yeah, even that isn't that much by the end of the game.
It's not.
What happens is if you choose to rebuild the town, and you probably will not be able to upgrade your arms as much, but I mean, it's not really such a deep choice at all, because upgrading your arms really isn't that much necessary either.
Yeah,
besides
especially
one
with,
or two.
How powerful magic can be.
Yeah.
And I think that like split between, like, the whole game was trying to be like, you have to have the strongest power is the power to protect. And it's like, okay, and you're kind of trying to be, like, cute with how you can either spend your money on the town and rebuilding something, or the arms and destroying something. But it's an RPG, you're spending money on weapons anyway. Like, either way, you have to upgrade. Yeah. So...
there's talking about how, they have that emptiness, but then they let you fix it, they let you bring it back. There's another part that, first I'll talk about the really good. This is in the third act, I would say, if there's acts to this game. There is a moment of extreme emptiness when, anyone playing the game realizes Jack is Garrett, who is a knight who defended this kingdom called Arctica, who fell to the demons years before the plot of Wild Arms even begins, when you turn on the game.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we know this, but the party members don't know this. Jack hasn't admitted to it, and when Jack finally realizes that one of the villains, Lady Harkin, is actually, I think her name's Elmina.
Yeah.
He realizes all his time, like his survivor's guilt this whole time, the reason he's been brooding, the reason he's been holding everything in, is meaningless, because the person he wants to take revenge on is the person he's trying to save. And that was just like a really cruel framing moment of just how empty the kind of like showdown plot or revenge plot could be in this so-called Western.
Yeah. It's really good. And then you have to fight her. And I think that moment where like you have to fight her because she's kind of possessed and not of her own will anymore. And then you get blessed with like the lion idol breaks, and you get the courage rune. This is
I would argue
courage.
in the very last fight, at least that's how I wish to interpret it. Elmina was conscious; she was not possessed anymore. She was not, I guess, basically a robot like she was before. She was aware, but then she turned to Lady Harkin anyways, and she did that final fight with Jack because that's how she wanted to. That's how she wanted to take agency the last time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of my favorite moments of the whole game. But there's actually a silly. It's a kind of a hidden Easter egg, I guess, is the way to put it. That when you rebuild the whole town, there will be a guy in the pub who will give you a random item. He's a dream chaser apparently, so he's been exploring. He'll give you a random item that disables magic. And there's near Baskar Village the
giant ring.
No, the Native American settlement. There's a giant ring, and if you do this ridiculous puzzle and go inside the giant ring, inside is the Guardian of Time, and for just no reason, when you do these obscure triggers, the Guardian of Time will revive Elmina and kind of null out all of Jack's character development. And just like
really,
yeah, really. Once again, you can in Wild Arms you can fix what's broken without any regards of what it meant to be broken.
Oh dear.
And I was kind of devastated, not because like it was just so much catharsis. It was just it wasn't right. It was really cheesy, and that's not what Jack was representing. But now apparently, like it funnels into this new. The only way to take this game is just how like. So JRPGs kind of have they're overtly spiritual, but they have a kind of antagonism with spiritual. I wouldn't say supernatural. I would say like gods with religion, but in Wild Arms is like a strange inverse where actually the whole time and the whole. I mean, I was waiting for it to switch on me, but it never happened. That these three characters have to completely trust in their gods, and throughout the whole game, their gods continually deliver them. And so it's almost like no matter how it doesn't really matter how strong these three characters are because they're going to be. All they have to do is do their best, and their gods will deliver them. And that was just a really it was just really strange in a JRPG to actually trust in the gods instead of be wary of them instead of being against them.
I hadn't thought of it like that, but yeah, there isn't a conflict that comes from that at all.
No. Sorry.
That's a pretty good kind of exemplar of the shortcomings of the writing in this game, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I guess it just really wanted to have the gamut of what we think of a JRPG is. It was so committed to that classic formula. So everything has to end in a happy ending, like all your efforts are going to be rewarded in the end, right? Because otherwise, why are you playing? But
yeah, it's a bit fairy story.
Yeah, it's a bit fairy story. When that keeps happening, though, I mean, I start to feel really sorry for the Quarter Knights, who actually almost have more personality than the main characters, and they're honorable and they have these motivations, and no matter how hard they work, it's always taken from them. It's always destroyed from them. And I started to feel really bad for Siegfried after he got trapped. Like he did his final bid against these people, trapping all inside another dimension, but it fails anyway because it always fails for Siegfried. And then with no like fault of his own, he gets possessed by, I guess, his own god. He gets possessed by his own god and ruined by his own god. And
even before that, for me, the characters that most stood out were the villains, which is never the case. I'm normally completely got no time for the villains at all.
Yeah, I know.
So halfway through the game, or kind of end of the first act, maybe. No, it's not quite the end of the first act. It's when Mother, so the top demon that Siegfried is trying to resurrect, actually comes back to life and is resurrected. And she's got this group of demons who've been working for thousands of years to bring their mother back so that they can conquer a new homeworld and finally have a home again. And Mother says, "Oh no, you were really young when we did the last planet that I destroyed. And actually, we're not here to take this world so you can have homeworld again. We're here to take this world so I can eat it.
Yeah.
But because you're my faithful disciples, I'll eat you." I can't remember. Is she going to eat them first or last?
She's going to eat them
first.
Last,
right. And then suddenly they're like, "Oh, we need to rethink this." that was probably my favorite moment from the game.
Yeah, I think that those turnarounds happen a lot with the Quarter Knights, where they're working. It's like an opposition. It's like a war, so they're working too within their own constraints, and they believe in their own powers. Whatever. I mean, yeah, and they succeed, and then every time once they succeed, it gets turned around in a moment, and that happens again in the photosphere when they construct their black tier that's going to corrupt the whole Earth. Like, right when they finish it, right when it all goes right, the heroes show up just in time to destroy it and ruin them again, and they have to start from square one.
Yeah.
Well, there is this theme of kind of futility running through all this.
Yeah.
Because it starts off with the world is dying. Yeah, plants aren't growing properly anymore. It's very hard to grow crops. There's that... where you meet the ancient girl. She's got a flower patch, and her miracle is she's managed to grow one flower in it because Eris was not original. So there's this. The world is dying, and you've got to find some. You've not only got to defeat the demons, you've got to find some way of bringing the world back to life. But throughout the first act, you're in these futile tasks of defend these towns against a demon horde that you can't possibly hope to defeat.
Yeah.
And then for everything else, there's a futility. Like with the bad guys, each of their schemes turns out to be futile in some way as well, even if it's only that you turn up the player characters to stop them.
Well, yeah. Well, even in their last bids, Siegfried twice traps you in another dimension, which was supposed to, the energy was supposed to destroy you, but every time, just coincidentally, somehow, no matter how hard Siegfried tried, they were able to escape. Or in the case of the ending, they had a Deus Ex Machina with their nice friend Gollum being able to take in all that energy.
Yeah, he took in a big bang. He's the ultimate defensive mechanism.
Because this part, I think, I would say in this part, Siegfried finally gets his comeuppance, at least enough for me to be happy, sort of happy, that he actually comes back from hell. He just shows up and says, yeah, I'm back from hell. No explanation of what that means or how he did it. But
it's
so
really good.
I think, yeah. So this is where, over and over again, I would say, even as your party... even as the player characters, what you're doing kind of gets misdirected or torn away from you. I mentioned the photosphere earlier, which seems to be your goal. It seems to be where all the demons are that you need to defeat. And so you march up to
didn't you think, or was it Devon who thought that was going to be the end of the game?
It really felt like the end, sort of end game thing.
It builds it up as this big kind of set piece, and then it's just not. There's a lot more game afterwards.
Yeah, you march up to the photosphere, and you actually fight your way all the way through it. But once you reach the end, the demons they say, oh, that wasn't even our plan. We had something else in store for you the whole time. And you're like, you really rise. But then, at a later point, after you finish one of the ruins, Siegfried actually uses his technology they had the whole time, the interdimensional transporter, to trap everyone exactly where they want them and to finish them off once and for all. Which culminates in this fight with Siegfried, and he does actually remove Rudy's arm, but then it shows that or I think I lost my thread, but I went kaput there.
Never mind.
All right, so I just want to get this out of the way. The localization is awful.
Yeah, it is.
The localization is pretty bad.
It's 90s localization. It's pre-Final Fantasy VII localization, so it's bad.
It's the localization of not having a dedicated, specific team who've got experience, who know what they're doing.
Yeah. Oh god. Among the worst offenders are Siegfried, as we've said, which is supposed to be Siegfried.
I think I like Siegfried
the
better.
Fenrir Knights. And then there is Garrett Van Buren, which is supposed to be Gart Vambrace, because terrible things.
The localization's bad. Also, the interface is really bad because they clearly tried to avoid using like the Final Fantasy word for things.
Yeah, that's a problem with Magic too.
And it's impossible to tell what things do.
Like, okay, I'm gonna pull up the list of spells in this game because we're gonna talk about the magic in this game because it owns, but only if you know what the hell you're doing.
I finally remembered where I was going with my earlier thought, though. I'm gonna finish. Siegfried, he has all his whole setup perfect to finish off the party, and then you actually do this final battle with who is the main villain this whole time, and then so that's the second time where you're framed as a pretty much end of game scenario, and they lose, and the game keeps going. Unfortunate to whatever plans they had cooked up, or whatever they wanted to do. That was a really simple conclusion.
Yeah, it has. This game has a lot of like spots where you could kind of tell they were thinking about ending it, but then they were like, "Nah, let's keep going for one reason or another."
We've got to show how big this game can be on this new console. Let's put more shit in it.
Yeah, that goes into like how big a lot of the areas are just for the sake of being really
I think
big.
we'll come back round to the tech and the kind of what that meant.
I want to. I mean,
let's talk magic.
Let's do Devon's thing about the magic.
Okay, so
okay, sure.
You have your basic. Okay, the system in this is kind of freeform. I compared it to like tabletop games. Basically, you have a number of crest graphs, which are basically spell slots, and you can fill those with basic white or black magic spells, which are generally healing or
the call's
offensive.
Getting messed up.
Yeah, a little bit. Oh well. Okay, so I explained all the stuff. I can edit out the weird bit where I fell off. Anyway, they never explain why, but you combine 4 runes with each other to combine into like 16 spells on each white or black school of magic, and there's basic and advanced, and they all have different names from their Final Fantasy counterparts because they needed to be not Squaresoft based. There's shield, which is just like protect.
Wait. Actually, I think shield actually raises magic resist. Oh, it doesn't.
No, that would.
Oh no, that's protect, right?
Yeah, that's protect.
This is why I'm confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, shield and high shield. I remember now.
Yeah, there's shield and high shield, which is.
What threw me for a loop was also.
LeeRoy? He's typing something.
Yeah.
Oh, what was I? Did I say? Did you guys just hear me or something?
I can hear you now.
Skype's getting messed up again.
Good grief.
Okay.
Okay, so basically, there's quick, which is haste. There's air screen, which is parry rate up, and parry rate's basically like I can't tell if parry rate is like your dodge chance or your counterattack chance.
I couldn't tell what parry was doing in this game at all.
Yeah.
You're only allowed to counter basic attacks, not special attacks.
Yeah, which makes it kind of bunk. There's Rage, which raises all stats by 10%, but berserks targets, so they will do nothing but normal attacks. Then there's Awaken, which you need, because it makes your party immune to sleep for the battle.
Sleep in this game is the most terrible state as ever.
Even though it's called Awaken.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, though. It's like an automatic alarm clock.
Yeah.
Every turn that you get put to sleep.
Which is good.
Well, it renders the entire sleep mechanic completely pointless if you know it's coming.
Yeah, which is kind of the point. But yeah, then there's also Valkyrie, which is all 7 elements, and it randomly attacks enemies. There's Vortex, Spark. They couldn't go for fucking fire, thunder, blizzard, and arrow because those were Final Fantasy. God. Then there's Blast, which is like just non-elemental explosion. And then there's stuff like Lifeguard, which is auto life, which I didn't know until just now. That would have been useful.
That would be very, very useful.
The description.
This is so typical of this game.
The description reads something like prevents exhaustion, and I guess they describe
it protects from exhaustion.
Yeah, they describe being KO'd as being exhausted. So
because they can't say KO'd
or
they
dead.
Yeah,
and okay. Parry is not countering. Parry is dodging.
Right.
Because there's a spell called Counter Up, which raises the counter rate.
Oh, yeah. But why didn't they call parry dodge? Why? Why?
Oh, that's neat.
Okay, also
that's great.
Soul Guard prevents instant death instant death magic, which is good. Then there's Reflect, obviously. Then there's like a substitute thing if you've ever played Pokemon. Then Lock State. Lock State is good.
Yeah, I didn't figure out what that one did, and that would have made things a lot easier too.
Basically, what Lock State does is, I'm pretty sure it doesn't say this. I think it says Lock State. Like, that's real helpful.
It just says what the spell is. Yeah.
Yeah, but what it does is it locks your party's status in whatever set it's in. So if your party is clear of statuses, they're immune to statuses. Then there's also anti-magic, which is, wow, just no magic does damage.
Really?
For 12 MP.
Who designed this game?
Oh, it gets better.
Media Vision.
Media Vision is... Okay, so if you want to use Advanced Black Magic, Banish, which is mini. That's all it is. It shrinks enemies and lowers their stats. There's Holy, which is renamed Saint, and there's Darkness, which is an evil attack. Okay, so here's the fun part. Prison is a spell that you really ought to learn to use, because it paralyzes, and if it affects them, it paralyzes them, which means they don't do anything, and one hit will kill any target afflicted by prison, no matter how weak.
What does the spell description actually say?
I have no idea. It says imprison enemy. Like, that doesn't... it doesn't mean anything. Basically,
we are just griping now.
I'm sorry. But, like, this game has a lot of cool, like, magic, and you can't do shit with it because you don't know what the fuck any of it does. Like, okay, there's
this
a spell
game was
called
localized
Eraser.
by first-party Sony, apparently.
Ugh. There's a spell called Eraser where you can just erase elemental weaknesses and defenses from a group of enemies, which includes physical and magical. Like, wow. And then there's Lucky Shot.
They really tried to put some interesting spells in this.
Like Randomizer. Everything under the Randomizer spell list is really cool. But...
I didn't ever cast that spell.
Because it's random. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Also, there's Lucky Shot.
And how would you know?
Yeah, Lucky Shot. Yeah, you should probably get off Wi-Fi, LeeRoy. Or get closer to the router. There's Lucky Shot, which is 30 MP, does terrible damage, but if it kills an enemy, it drops its item, no matter what the, like, chance is.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really good, especially when you use it with Prison, which lets you kill anything in one hit, no matter how terrible the damage. That's how I got the Necronomicon, which gave me 500-something sorcery by the end of the game. It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, and stat names is another thing. Stat names is even worse than the spells for not using the Final Fantasy word and not using the... Because stat names are pretty standard.
Yep.
Yeah, strength, toughness, agility, and...
And there's LeeRoy.
Well, let me see if I can do something about this, okay?
Okay. And basically, like, okay, Vitality I kind of read as Constitution, going back to tabletop RPGs, so whatever. But, and like, okay, Power...
Response.
And
also, it never gives you, like, on any of the default stat screens, it never gives you the full things. It just gives you 3-letter abbreviations of them.
Yeah.
So, like, spell power is SOR for sorcery.
Yeah.
And speed is RES for response.
Yep.
we could dunk on this game forever.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can say something more productive.
I think it's interesting how all three of the characters have different forms of what amount to basically the same offensive capabilities in terms of non-standard attack kind of deals. Like, Rudy has arms, which are the guns, and Cecilia has magic, and Jack has fast draw.
Yeah, it's called fast draw because this is a Western, but it's sword skills.
Yeah, it's more like Iaido kind of thing.
Okay, I'm back.
Yes, actually, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, the dude's using a katana.
Is someone going to talk about how all their skills are like found skills? Like you're forged?
That's cool. That's what I was going for too. Like they all have a different form of non-standard offensive capabilities, but they all find it in different ways. Like with Cecilia, you have to get crest grafts, which are like items, and then for Rudy, you find different arms in chests.
Which are in a specific, different kind of chest that only he can open.
Just to make sure that you get the idea that, oh, these things are important. You should get them.
Important and special and distinctive. And then, Jack's are probably the most interesting because he gets... What he gets is a hint.
He improvises,
all sorts of different places where he gets hints for new ideas for techs.
Yeah.
And then, when it shows up on the menu, it's just question marks. It doesn't actually say what the name of the thing is until you've used it enough times.
Actually, it's just random whether it'll proc.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, even then, it's kind of... that kind of works because the idea is he's inventing it and he's got to come up with a name for it.
Yeah, and he has to get the motion right.
Practice
because
it.
Cosmic Nova, I'm gonna tear its space-time continuum kind of deal and unleash star pain on you.
That's a move you want to practice somewhere very, very far away from home.
And very, very close to enemy demons.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's a cool system for kind of relating the characters to the world. But then again, they don't do anything with it. It's all effectively just you find a chest. Or in Jack's case, occasionally it's you find a specific random encounter.
Or a statue.
Yeah.
The statues kind of devalue it because it was really cool when you just something happens and then Jack's like, huh, I could probably do that.
He's like, wow, I could use the wind to do things. And he's like, oh, I'm going to throw a sonic boom at a dude. And apparently there's a fast draw that you only get. There's one called Shadowbind that you have to go behind a boss room to get. And then once you do that, if you use that on an already paralyzed enemy, it paralyzes the enemy. If you use that on an already paralyzed enemy, you get another tech.
Really?
Yeah.
That's actually cool.
Yeah. And
it's the sort of thing you never find playing it naturally, except by extreme fluke.
Yeah.
But it's a really cool idea.
I just wish it was implemented better, which is why I'm kind of curious about the remake. Because the remake exists, and maybe the localization's better since it's PS2, and maybe
the world
also
map is better in the remake.
I'm glad because
I think there's other oddities too, like Zed and Calamity Jane can actually join your party.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Calamity Jane deserves to be in the party.
Honestly, she does.
She's pretty entertaining. I think there's 5 other characters in Alter Code, but anyway, should we get round to the tech side of this?
I wanted to talk about actually how the statues kind of illustrate something that happens obnoxiously with this game. How the developers just seem to take things overly literal, and they don't go for symbols or anything. The puzzles are just actual gaudy switches. The switch sprite is everywhere through the game.
Yeah.
And statues will be blocking your way that don't really fit where you are or, this place. They're just in there to be this puzzle.
Like Malduk. There's this thing where you have to press buttons on the floor to move statues out of the way.
That's the very last dungeon called the Statue Room, where you move statues.
Yeah.
And it's oh, yeah, okay. And I don't really want to go on and on about the puzzles because I can just sum up that I kind of hate them. It's navigating the dungeons often is actually really satisfying. They kind of have a handle of how things should, like go and flow, and they all have this theme, but they always break apart when you have to do just these really dumb surface puzzles, like the worst rejects from a Game Boy Zelda game.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's very 2D Zelda, and it's like Zelda games work when the dungeon is structured as a lesson in one particular thing, which is the item you get halfway through the dungeon. So you spend the first half of the dungeon with your attention being drawn to this thing you can't do.
Yeah.
Yeah, going through rooms where it's clear that when you come back here, you'll have an easier time of it. But Wild Arms doesn't do that because not every dungeon has a new tool, so it can't teach you anything interesting with the setups.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really explore your abilities, so it just feels like awkwardness.
What I think, one thing that I would like to bring up, like, as a counterexample to that, is when you get the Power Glove, which, I love things named the Power Glove. They're so bad. That's a meme. Anyway, once you get the Power Glove, you come across this hookshot pillar, and you know from experience that it's purple and it has, like, directions on the top, so you know you can move it around. But you're like, I'm already on this platform, I don't need it, but I just got this glove that lets me punch things real good. So you just slug this hookshot pole across a gap to cross a gap. It's really good. And I don't think
it's probably the only example of that.
Yeah, it's really shameful because it's like they had a good idea once.
Well, it's not just... it's not the only time you do that trick in the game, but it's the only time where the game communicates a trick that well.
And that's
I think, I like some credit, the only credit you can give to it is how the puzzles kind of... When there are puzzles, sometimes you totally forget you had tools and construct a dungeon that you don't even need to use them at all. And other times they just make you use one tool and that's it, exclusively just because they felt like it.
Yeah.
But occasionally, you have all your characters working in tandem, and you can take from it that all these characters are working together, and they all depend on each other to accomplish things inside of battle and outside of battle. But yeah, it's not really consistent.
When it works, it's okay. But like a lot of the time, it's just there aren't enough pieces moving at the same time. There's just you do this thing, and then obviously the next thing in sequence is switch character and do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on to tech, I want to just close out my crush with Siegfried. So let's just say, the three main characters. Let's just say they all have a very extremely heavy burden. Like Cecilia has a birthright. She's born into being a high priestess. They call her a shaman, but I don't think that's the right translation. It's just they call it. So she's a high priestess for this religion for the Guardians, and she's tasked with keeping the balance in the whole entire world, and she has to just own that, live up to that, even though she's still a teenage girl. She's 17, I think, as stated in the game. And Jack has this survivor's guilt. He couldn't protect any of his knights in his order, and they all kind of fell one by one. And so now he has to carry that with him through the whole game. He has this burden of these forces are attacking the whole world, and he already failed to fight them again. And Rudy is a Holmcross, which is a fancy word for robot. And he was constructed a long time ago to be the perfect weapon, the perfect fighting machine. And, Rudy has that burden that he has to deal with and own up to, even though we have no idea what he thinks about that. Well, Siegfried is the eldest son of Mother. He was the first demon created to serve out her whims, abject to whatever Siegfried desires. So, and it's shown just that Siegfried has desires of his own, just like Cecilia. Cecilia just wants to be a normal girl, and Siegfried doesn't want to be just a normal demon, but he does want to. He does want to have the demons have their comeuppance. He wants a society of demons. He wants his race to have prosperity.
He wants to have a home.
Yeah, he wants to have a home more than anything else. But he has this horrible birthright of being being the firstborn of Mother, being a slave to his own god, and his own god is not the Guardians, it's the unfortunate Mother. And so I come to view Siegfried as this tragic foil to the three heroes, where he's not necessarily evil, but violent and ambitious, and he's just he's ruined by his environment in a way that Cecilia at least is set up to excel and succeed in her environment. And yeah, I just found that really hard to reconcile, and it's interesting, but it's also frustrating because I'm pretty sure the writers just treated the demons as these evil Tolkien, just evil creatures, that it's not a big deal and they deserve to be defeated, so everything's fixed in the end. But it seems like a really cruel way to treat these characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's very much, it expects each character to be a particular thing, and it's not even just. It's probably clearest with the demons that they're the bad guys, so you beat them and you don't really have to do much to give that meaning. But also, there's this weird pattern that happens with 2 or 3 different female side characters of them expressing affection for Rudy.
Yeah.
Like Calamity Jane particularly. Which is clearly because he's the protagonist. Or he's not the protagonist, but he's the protagonist because the game has decided he's the protagonist.
And it's easy to argue that he's actually not the protagonist, with the whole ending revolving around only Cecilia, and most of the conflict only happening because of Cecilia, but apparently Rudy's the protagonist.
Yeah, Rudy being the protagonist was such a, not... It just didn't sit right with me so much that I actually got stuck in the beginning of the game where you have to gather up your party and go to Larithia's tomb, because I was like, why isn't Jack coming along? I'm talking to him. And I'm like, oh, do I have to talk to him as Rudy? God damn it. And it's just like, oh, come on. Cecilia is so much more main character.
The story is about her, but
yeah,
Rudy is
it's not
the
like
silent
this
cipher,
is an unfamiliar pattern in JRPGs,
though.
Where it's actually it's not like it's not just Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, I know.
Like Final Fantasy X is probably the most obvious version of it, but also does more with it than most. Like generally speaking, a lot of the time the protagonist will be a really boring character, and the most interesting character will be the nearest woman to him.
Yeah, which is, I wouldn't say just like a JRPG problem.
It's a video games problem.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a mass culture problem, and the same happens in films.
Mm-hmm.
The most damning indictment I can come up with for Rudy is that I didn't even twig that he was a silent character for so long, because the silence that it sets up for him as protagonist, just... the rest of the cast are also so uninteresting to start with that you just don't really notice a gap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a recent problem with, I'm gonna say this wrong probably, but Attilia Iris, the main character, is this just really perfect, good person who doesn't do anything wrong, and that was just a really frustrating kind of JRPG cipher to put in your game. But Rudy's also characterized as being perfect and fallible, kind and loyal to everyone. But Rudy's a robot. He was made that way. He's all the desires of people, so it actually makes sense that he's this ideal person. But I don't even know if you would be able to characterize that kind of person either. So I'm not like totally accepting the silence, but it almost works with all the crazy dumb things they put into their game already.
Yeah.
Compare him to Cube in Live Alive, who is also a robot.
Cube is
who is a silent protagonist.
Way more amusing, way more characterized.
Yeah,
and
Cube is a much deeper character.
Yeah, Cube is a deeper character than Rudy.
Well, Cube's the best character in Live Alive, so... but we're dunking again. Let's talk about something else.
You can go on to the tech now, probably.
So, this is a PlayStation launch title, or basically a PlayStation launch title, right?
I think it was a bit later than that.
I don't know when the PlayStation came out, but it was 96.
This is 96.
Which is an interesting... I like that. That's just particular for me, because Persona 1 also came out the same year, at 96.
Actually, yeah, PlayStation's a couple of years before that.
I know that Suikoden came out in 95 and in Japan, so...
But we're talking an early PlayStation 1
it's an early
game.
PlayStation.
And it's a game that very clearly takes most of its cues from SNES JRPGs. Yeah? It's...
inarguably.
The dungeons are tile sets, and the whole level design is just... Each area is a different arrangement of tiles. And it's top-down, 2D sprites,
It's very Camelot, Golden Sun kind of deal with looks.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, I bet they were inspired by Wild Arms, at least audio-visually.
Yeah.
But then you get into the combat, and the combat is in, like, early PS1 3D. But the art style for the models is very clearly just what a 16-bit sprite would look like in 3D.
Yeah.
Like, they have the massive heads and the low-detail bodies.
And also they have the Breath of Fire Dutch angle for battle camera.
Well, that has to be spastic, though. It's never, like, constant on the angle. But yeah.
Well, I mean, you can change it to that.
Well,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. The motions that the characters do, not just what the camera does, but the motions that the characters do with the big, like, jump across the screen to attack, that's very SNES.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, like, we've seen those animations before, and this is what they look like in 3D. And then it puts a big swoopy camera around that, because it's 3D and you've got to put a big swoopy camera around it.
Yeah.
Look at what we can do now with this technology. I mean, Austin, who ducked out of this one because he just couldn't get on with the game at all. Like, his comment at the time was the game really shows how necessary some of the later PS1 JRPGs were to kind of change how the genre worked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, also I had to think about 3D probably in general for all titles, like, because the impact Final Fantasy VII had.
Yeah, which came out 2 months later in Japan and 5 in the US, but this game got overshadowed.
The Wild
hard.
Arms dev team must have been kicking themselves when that happened.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, well, yeah, we're out of date now. So a lot of what I look at with games is how the environments work, not just like what they look like, but how they direct the player to move through them, or the player to move a character through them. And this is a really clear illustration of what changed with FF7, because here this is a SNES style environment. Always, it's about tile sets. So a dungeon is a very homogeneous thing. Yeah, it all uses the same tile set generally, and the different sub areas of the dungeon are just differentiated by, like, the actual geography of the pathways.
Mm.
So it's a map basically. Whereas with FF7, because every screen has its own, like, bespoke backdrop, its own pre-rendered backdrop, individual screens feel more distinctive, but this kind of clearly identifiable, this is a dungeon, this is a town, starts to fall by the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing with FF7, now every distinct screen has its own camera rig, or you see it's the start of that. And you see that more again in FF8 when the areas themselves become 3D.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that's became really important through PS2 and PS3 period JRPGs. So you look at particularly Tales games, I'm thinking of, a lot of what gives an area its distinctive feel is how the camera moves in response to what you do as player.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the legibility of the areas comes from camera movement. And actually, Tales of Graces is, for all I don't get on with that game very much, the camera work in it, I think, does a really good job of, like, shifting your attention around as you move through an area to highlight the particular features they want to bring out. And that's what I really missed with this game, is you're always at the same angle. There's never a moment where the camera looks at something to tell you this is important, or looks at something to tell you, look at this, isn't it pretty?
Yeah.
It's always, here's where you are, here's the immediate environment, deal with that. And it's that for me was why it felt, more than anything else, was why it felt so old-fashioned.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to go back to something in that style after you've been playing stuff with, like, a free camera, for example, or more designated camera direction in later PS1 and on.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting, because now we've got kind of Tales of Zestiria and FF15 are coming out, which look like they're not going to have distinct screens anymore. You know, it's all going to be one continuously loading, scrolling landscape.
Yeah.
Xenoblade forever.
That game, actually, like, I'm playing that at the moment, and Devon hates it, and I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point. That game is a weird one for this, but like, the new Xenoblade Chronicles is probably going to be the same way. And the need to have distinct areas, each with their own camera rig, each with their own visual setup, is going away, and it's being shifted now for something else. But we're now almost 20 years on from FF7, so it's worth noting just how much that shift has lasted, and how much it's shaped what we know of as the genre.
Yeah, which it lasted at least majorly until Tales of Graces, which was on the Wii in 2009.
I've been actually, like, I didn't, that was really good, so now I'm sitting here thinking that tile sets in the first place, they were made so you could fit the game on a Nintendo cartridge. That has to be the only reason why, because it's to save space, it's to reuse the same graphical asset, and
well, it's also like it became a very efficient way of developing a game. Like
it's a good
model.
Now
we have RPG Maker, and it gives you a sense of how easy tile sets are to work with compared to 3D landscapes.
And so when the JRPGs go into the Super Nintendo, they're still making games with tile sets. They're still making games like this until a midpoint, and then games like Live a Live, Final Fantasy VI Chrono Trigger, despite what they do and what they don't do, they don't commit to just tile sets. They try to make more distinct screens in these dungeons. They try to make each place differentiate them from screen to screen, which is something that older JRPGs didn't have the opportunity to. But it kind of goes to show how developers of at least JRPGs are kind of uncritical of things that go put into their games, and so tile sets lived all the way on into the PlayStation era, into Wild Arms, because it works, it's efficient. Without, I think but it wasn't really examined why Wild Arms itself was even employing that tile set while it was emulating that style, because nothing inside Wild Arms is really reflective of older JRPGs, except that it wants to be one. It's not that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a kind of classicism, I guess, of like, we'll do it this way because this is how it's always been done, and we don't know what we're doing otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't know what they're doing anyway. So.
Yeah, they don't know what they're doing.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point I wanted to make about the tech, is just this really highlights kind of the transition, and also the reason why I don't get on with the older style of JRPG, because I never learned to read those levels, so I just get lost all the time. I got really lost on the world map as well.
Yeah, the world map is kind of terrible.
Wild Arms. Yeah, the world maps. Like when I got in my boat, I couldn't do anything. It took me hours to get places.
I'm really glad I realized that there was a button to look at the map
inside the boat.
Like, if I didn't remember that there was oh, hey, I have a map, because I raided some bandit's cave and got a map.
I never even got that map.
It's so useful.
I got it, but I forgot about it for ages.
Yeah, it's like you don't even need to pull out your inventory. You just hit select and it opens the map. And I'm like, oh, that's good.
I was trashed all game, just kind of sailing around aimlessly trying to figure out where to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. The map, though, is a good example of kind of the tech pressure again, because the world map has been designed to make the world feel as big as possible with the area that they've got to work with.
Yeah.
If you actually call up on the web the world map for Wild Arms 1, it's got the classic wraparound thing where you go off the top of the map and you come on the bottom, but the world is actually diagonally divided across the square of the map, so you can follow the main landmass round and round forever, and it never has a break in it. And the only reason to do that, it's really confusing, it's difficult to read, but it does make the map feel bigger, which I think, again, plugs into the fact we're on a new platform, it's a new generation, exciting things are supposed to be happening, we've got to have bigger maps. Which is a pattern you see again at PS2 level, and at PS3 level, and probably now again at PS4, to be honest.
Yeah, it's entirely likely that we haven't had any major PS4 titles and JRPGs anyway, and that probably won't be a status quo that changes with Persona 5, because Persona 5 will have sort of a map and stuff, but it's going to be Persona.
I think Persona 5 is going to catch up and do things as all other JRPGs were doing now in 2015. That's what it's going to be like.
Hot
I'm going to
takes,
enjoy it.
Persona 5 catching up to 2011.
I don't want to go on about the down. Yeah, okay. I don't want to go on for Persona, although I was about to.
Okay, so let's talk about the best dungeon in this game, the Book of Illusions.
That is
De
a
La
pretty sweet
Metallica.
dungeon.
Yeah, the Escher one.
It's so good that I don't want to like compare it to all the other ones because
I'm a fan of Pleasing Gardens too, the one where you can see the whole earth under you. And all the triggers are backwards, and the teleports don't seem to go anywhere. But I actually really enjoyed the aimlessness of that dungeon.
The mirage part of that whole place just was really frustrating.
It was one of 3 different Lost Woods style dungeons in the game. And
the actual Lost Woods can go to hell, though.
There is a reason why Zelda games only ever have 1 Lost Woods, and it's always small.
Yeah. I really liked the De La Metallica though, because it's this Escher as fuck dungeon design where it's just these floating platforms with stairs between them. And I felt like I was playing Echo Chrome, which is a weird feeling.
The best bits are where there's a staircase from one level down to the same level.
Yeah.
It's like playing with the tile sets, but not critically or self-aware. But it's like, just kind of like, aren't these ridiculous?
I think my favorite puzzle in there was the one where you go up to this door and it's like, oh, 2 hours ago this door was open, so you go, okay,
yeah.
So I go counterclockwise around the room, and it's like 1 hour ago people were going through this door, and then you do it again. It's like, and now at this warmest time of welcome, the door is open, and it opens and you go through. And it's like, okay, that's a really abstract puzzle. It's really good, but...
Yeah, I like that one. Although, I ended up Googling it because I got confused about how many times I'd counted. And apparently you can also do it with the stopwatch tool.
Well, the stopwatch just treats it as if you had just entered a room, so...
Yeah, but if you use the stopwatch in that room, it rewinds time an hour.
Oh, that's
I just
also
walked
good.
around the stairs, That's cool.
That's cool, but it's also another good example of this game doing something really interesting and also doing a less interesting version of the same thing to completely undercut it.
It's really inconsistent with did you guys do Heaven's Corridor with the actual puzzles that are kind of impossible to do?
I forget.
It's where you get Cecilia's dual cast. So it's completely optional.
No,
I used the guide.
Yeah, well, there are these. This is where it has an actual legitimate puzzle that's also infuriating to do, where you have to get these crystals.
Oh, those I did myself, and those were neat. But no, I'm not doing them again.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. They have these set up specific puzzles for this area, only in this area, and then other places they just have switches and statues, and they're just really inconsistent of what they do where. And I mean, that's even a total optional place with this kind of set piece they designed, and they just threw it. Probably because it was too difficult.
That place also blows because there's a bunch of traps on the ground that'll just send you to the entrance.
That is actually an awful dungeon. Probably the worst, but it's optional.
Yeah.
I think one more standout for me in particular was the Demon Laboratory, where it's a slightly edited version of the tile set that you see in Photosphere, but it's this really neon bright, unfitting, sickly green everywhere. It's just this really unsettling and strange palette they picked, and it clashed with the whole entire game, but it fit the environment of this Demon Laboratory, because this is where you find out that Alizad, I think is his name, has been turning humans into demons by planting seeds that turn into demons inside humans, which is just really sudden body horror in Wild Arms for of course no reason. But yeah, that dungeon was pretty intimidating to be in.
Yeah, I mean it does make good use of the color palette, I think. The color is always very rich.
Despite there being at least 10 dungeons using that ruin kind of stone tile set.
Well, that's an endemic problem to JRPGs.
It's not that endemic, I think. The only other game I could think of is Final Fantasy IV that likes to put you in caves the entire game, as often as Wild Arms likes to put you in ruins.
Yeah, they tried to start out like Jack's whole prologue with being a treasure hunter, but it kind of falls by the wayside, and they just kind of litter your path with these ruins. And it's like, turns out he's good at navigating these because he's a treasure hunter, but otherwise we're not going to touch on it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that's I think that's everything I got possible.
Still a good hour of podcast.
Well, we got like questions as well, haven't we?
Yeah. How about you drop one on us first, and I'll do the 3 in the forum.
Cool. So I got a question on Twitter from my housemate Neen, who actually probably without whom I wouldn't be here today, because when I got into JRPGs, I was playing her JRPGs on her PlayStation when we were student flatmates 10 years ago. She writes, a lot of older JRPGs now change hands for quite high prices. She gives the example, Wild Arms 5 now trading for 65 quid. What is it about the classics that keep people wanting? And why have more recent games failed to capture people in the same way? So
she's asking why JRPGs are dead.
I thought this was a great question for us to talk about, even though we're probably not going to answer it, because
it's kind of a musing question more than a one that needs an answer.
Well, we can pull it apart a bit. Like, she cites the example of Wild Arms 5, which is a game from only 7-8 years ago anyway.
Yeah.
And, like, around the same time there was Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, which now goes for 100 quid over here. I do love reminding you of which JRPGs are popular, because you make the funniest noises.
Yeah, well, I'm a pirate, so like the fact that these things are $1 zillion and I'm broke as hell doesn't matter, because I have a modded Wii and I have Radiant Dawn on there. Yeah.
Are you sure you want to be advertising this?
I'll cut it out.
And the point about prices is that, like, Xenoblade Chronicles, which is 5 years old,
has it depreciated?
I was looking at it, like, I got it on the Wii U eShop for $20, but, like, physical copies are still 90 quid.
Wow.
That's shameful.
I have physical copy of Xenoblade, actually.
Yeah. Sell it and get the eShop version.
Honestly, I should.
But, and the point is, the games, I think the games kind of attract high prices when when there's some cachet about the physical copy, when it's rare or there weren't a lot or whatever. Because games from the same period as Wild Arms 2, like early PS3 JRPGs and early Xbox 360 JRPGs, you can get a lot of those for a few dollars.
Like Vesperia?
Well, Vesperia a bit, but actually for a while Vesperia was really expensive because it was only available physical copy, and the physical copies were quite rare.
I got mine for like $15 on eBay, so...
I can remember when I was first looking at buying my own copy, it was like 60 quid.
Yikes.
Physical copy. Yeah. But that's a game that's worth 60 quid. But like for stuff I'm working on, I need to get hold of like Lost Odyssey, and that's now £3 to £5 second hand. Well, it's not a bad game, but price hasn't lasted. So the price thing is a bit deceptive. We won't know which games from the last 2 or 3 years will sell for a lot down the line. Sorry?
Yeah, we won't know what's going to turn into gold.
Yeah. Xillia 2 will turn into gold because it's an excellent game.
Well, you say that, but you can literally buy the collector's edition for $60, which is what I paid for the regular edition. I almost want to buy a collector's edition just so I could get the goddamn costumes. I want that Emil. Oh, so good.
But also something like this idea that recent games haven't captured the JRPG audience the way that older games have is so pervasive to JRPG writing that we named a podcast after it.
Yeah, I think that particular quality is pretty easy, kind of easy to explain. It's that JRPGs themselves require a time investment of part of yourself goes into them. When you finish them, when you play through them, when you own them, right? So that's why something like Chrono Trigger, which is immediately recognizable, people grew up with it,
and it's only 16 hours.
Or even Final Fantasy VII. Well, but people played New Game Plus on Chrono Trigger. People played that out. They seem to feel more valuable. People don't want to part with these cartridges, so that's why Mega Man X sells for $25, but Chrono Trigger sells for $70 because, there's just, I would say there's less people selling them. There's a more perceived value in these JRPGs that are that people like cherish, I guess, or like more, because Mega Man X is a cherished game that tons of people love, but it doesn't feel like the same kind of it doesn't feel like that same kind of, I don't know the word, like an heirloom almost, where
nostalgia.
You don't. Yeah, it's
kind of nostalgia.
It doesn't have a legacy.
Yeah. It doesn't take as much of you to put into it to play it for most people who are going to play it, and so that might be a particular thing that happens, at least with JRPGs.
Yeah, it's possible that people get more invested in a JRPG because it delivers more kind of personal connection. But equally, it's difficult to generalize about what kind of people like what games.
Yeah, I mean there are just oddity Nintendo games that go for $100 of just because they're limited print runs. So
yeah. The second part of the question, what is it about the classics that keep people wanting, and why have more recent games failed to capture people in the same way? I think the answer to that is just we forget how many games contemporary with the classics we'd all rather forget.
Yeah.
I mean...
like Wild Arms.
Well, Neen's example of Wild Arms... Neen's example of Wild Arms 5 being an expensive one, it's not far from being contemporary with Eternal Sonata, which nobody wants to play again.
Except me.
I'm going to play it again, and I'm going to record myself doing so for everybody's amusement, but nobody wants to.
Yeah, and I have another example in Monokemia, which came out the same year as Persona 4. So,
oh god.
On the same system, both in in America, and fucking Vesperia came out that year too. The World Ends With You came out that year, but no one pays attention to Monokemi because it's not a huge name like that, and I think it's really good.
I'm in much the same boat with Vesperia, actually.
Yeah,
it's also true for other styles of games that there are these big giant pillars that everyone pays attention to, like Half-Life 2, for first-person shooters. When there are a lot of other games that went through the cracks. That's not telling of anything necessarily, except gaming culture's own fascination with its own canon, rather than
it's being. The whole thing is some games are codified, whatever, into the game of the year for the genre, and others outside of that won't get much attention, which is why Persona 4 is a giant pain in my ass.
A lot of the ways we treat our canon is based on what sells the most, so the JRPGs we remember are the ones that sold the most. But it's hard to say what or why, those, whatever, it's hard to say why that particularly communicates that they're not capturing people the same way, because Persona 4 has a huge fan base, and it'll probably be like Chrono Trigger from years from now.
Yeah. Also, I think people are just not getting captured by games because they're not giving games the chance to capture them. They see some new JRPG and they're just like, oh, that looks too Japanese for me, and I'll go back to playing Persona 4, the most Japanese game ever.
Maybe.
It's frustrating because I do think people would like JRPGs if they took the time to play them, which is part of why I put together this podcast. But, if they're not willing to engage, just so be it. Their fault for missing out. I just don't want them saying, oh, the genre is terrible now. Well, let's go back to the old days where games were Chrono Trigger and no other games existed.
I think that another factor is just how vocal just people who really enjoy classic JRPGs are.
There are some JRPG games that have just terrible fan bases.
It seems to dominate the discourse. It seems like we can never move on from Final Fantasy VI because the fans are still extremely intense for these old games, and I can't think of a reason. I can't really pinpoint a reason why, but that is a reason why it seems that way. And I don't think it shows the size. I don't know how many dedicated Final Fantasy VI fans there are today, but there can't be that many. But they're incredibly vocal about it.
Yeah.
They're pretty noisy. And the other thing we don't see is we don't have any direct contact with how well these games do in Japan. The Tales of franchise has its own convention in Japan.
Yeah, it's rivaling Final Fantasy most of the time. It's because it's okay, people in Western culture just don't like Tales as much because it's too anime or too Japanese. But they're Japan, they're gonna like the thing from that's Japanese. So it's rivaling Final Fantasy and like stuff like the Saga series, Romancing Saga and the like.
Yeah.
Never really caught on the same as it did over there, which is why we don't get games from that series very often. So, it's a cultural thing. Like, and I kind of hesitate to say this, but like, sure, if a series or a game is too Japanese for you because it's a Japanese role-playing game, okay, you go... Like I said
go play
earlier,
something else.
Go play something else. It's your loss that you're not willing to sacrifice a little bit of your American or like Western centrism to perhaps enjoy a thing.
Well, there's a lot of hostility to the idea of just enjoying a thing.
Yeah.
Particularly in kind of mainstream writing about games, I think.
I'm going to say there's another new kind of face to this with fan service games becoming localized over America. But it doesn't mean that these games never existed. This was always part of JRPGs. It's just now there's an American audience for them.
Yeah.
But it's not like telling of where JRPGs are going or what they're doing, because they've always been making these games, whether maybe just on the PC but even on the PSP. I mean, these games have always existed. It's not like they're suddenly popping up now. It's that we're suddenly getting localizations for them.
Yeah, because people will buy them, even if they're not you, which I think is my main point.
Yeah. I think we've probably laid that one to rest.
Just like the genre.
Thanks, Devin.
That's Devin's favorite topic there.
Okay, so let's do Jackson's question. All right.
Is it the one about the fish?
No.
Good.
And Jackson says, this is actually for all of you. You should make that field a checklist. For future reference, everyone listening, in the form that I'm going to link every time we record, the second option, or the second question where you can select who the question is for, you can leave that blank. It'll get directed to all of us. Don't worry. Okay. What other areas of games specifically appeal to you, and how does that inform your approach to your critical focus on JRPGs?
Who wants to go first?
I have no idea. So,
because I kind of do have stuff I can talk about while you think. So
that's interesting.
There are two things I'm into in games. One is narrative, which is obviously a big JRPG thing, and the other is movement, which often isn't a big JRPG thing. But a lot of what I look at with JRPGs, and I mentioned this earlier, is this business of how you move through an environment and how the environment communicates the expected motion to you. So I look a lot at, what's the actual topography and cartography of an environment, where the camera is pointing, what your attention is being drawn to as you move, and how scenery and kind of sense of effort as you move through create atmosphere and characterize the story. So I think that answers the question.
Mm-hmm.
LeeRoy?
I would say that I'm really fascinated with depictions of struggle and tragedy, and at least in media, and so I really enjoy extremely hard action games like Contra, Metal Slug, and Alien Soldier are some of my absolute favorites, just because of how much is stacked against you. And I feel that JRPGs are kind of existential like that, where the space is all about informing the kind of conflicts you're going to be doing over and over and over again. And so a lot of the action games I enjoy are more storyless, and even though I love the stories in JRPGs, I like the conflict and the ideology always being physical, literal, and fighting. And so I enjoy action games also. Like the Platinum games are also some of my favorites because they kind of have that similar aesthetic. But I also enjoy visual novels to an incredible degree because there's static games like JRPGs, and they're about potentiality of things, what could happen, and exploring a narrative space, which JRPGs sometimes do and sometimes don't. And visual novels are actually kind of like a cousin or kin to JRPGs, and they're really useful to looking at JRPGs critically. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I enjoyed visual novels as well, and I'm kind of glad more of them are getting kickstarted and brought over. As for me, I started out my gaming, in my lifetime by playing Sonic games, So I've always been kind of fascinated with movement, like RJ, and how the player connects to their avatar specifically, and finding good games in which I enter like a zone and I get like, it's kind of weird, but my brain kind of mentally connects like inputs with like movements of a character. So I try and map, like in Tales games, I try to map different arts to different like directions that make sense for like what I want to do. Like if I want to do a whirlwind kick in Tales of Xillia, like a snap kick, I slap that on the right because I want to hit right and do a thing, because you turn right when you kick, kind of that sort of thing. I've also been for a while interested in like both character interactions and all of this working together. Like, I'm kind of looking forward to Final Fantasy 15 just because there's a lot of like actual interaction between the characters in ways that aren't. I think a lot of Final Fantasy games have an issue where their dialogue is detached from like any actions the character might be taking, and I think that's just an artifact of me looking at PlayStation 1 era Final Fantasy games. But I think Final Fantasy 15 will be the game that'll change that and make that more interesting for me. That's also why I like Tales games, because like skits and stuff, they're kind of limited, but they do like show the characters interacting and.
Yeah, you get interactions that aren't just on the next plot development.
Yeah.
Except in Tales of the Abyss, where every plot development comes with 4 skits.
Yeah. God. But also,
Abyss is really good for other reasons. Play Abyss.
Yeah, Abyss is good. I really want an HD remake of that next.
Oh God, yes.
Anyway, the second part of this question.
Wait, I actually have a little more to add.
Okay.
I was just thinking about it. Another thing that I really like in JRPGs is like the intentionality of the spaces, the geometry. And Zolani was tweeting earlier, I don't know if he's going to commit to this word, but he used moments to describe King Kong's geometry, to describe its levels. And I think that sensation of moments, of places to be in, is the strongest in JRPGs. But I'm also really, like, I really enjoy adventure games because they're all about framed still moments, or even more like Zelda, where you have just these monuments to moments, and you have to navigate them and understand them, and that's also what playing a JRPG is like.
Yeah. Okay, so the second part of this question, more generally, how does the same question but for areas of interest or study that aren't related to games?
Well, I'm a philosophy lecturer and I have a PhD in abstract metaphysics, so I look a lot at kind of things like, what does virtual mean, and what kind of significance do actions have in, human actions have in virtual worlds. If you press buttons on a controller and that makes somebody kill someone in a virtual world, what does that mean? That's a very reductive example, but that's the kind of thing I'm going to be teaching in my classes on the philosophy of the virtual in a couple of years when they start. So there's my other big thing, I suppose.
And how about you, LeeRoy?
I think the only thing that I can even, like, I spend a lot of time in or have any knowledge of is music, and I'm especially metal. So I spent a lot of time listening to metal growing up and even now. And metal's about like powerful sensations of sound, of ideologies like clashing and being declared out, and I think if anything is most like a JRPG, it's metal music, in my opinion. But I've spent a lot of time listening to music, and I think the intentionality of sound. So the kind of things sound itself is trying to evoke at any time. Kind of it can be compared to moments of a static game or a game that's trying to have you feel certain things in like a conscious or minimalist space. And besides video games, I'm really into music.
Mm-hmm. And as for me, this is a really profoundly empty way to say I like anime, but I've been expanding my research into character interactions into the animated medium. Anime's good.
Anime is probably the most direct analog to JRPGs, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad we didn't bring up Symphogear until now, which is Wild Arms.
Talk about Symphogear.
Even worse because the music is bad.
Kaistos tweeted Symphogear music and it had a literal callback to Wild Arms, and I'm pretty sure that does not fit in Symphogear as much as it doesn't fit in Wild Arms either. So I was just like, okay,
yeah,
wow. How can you still be composing things like Wild Arms this far? Just in 2015 or whenever it came out, 2014.
The funny thing is, the composer only did Wild Arms 5.
Yeah, what?
It's not even the whole series composer.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, let's stop talking about Symphogear because I'm gonna be real angry if we do that.
I don't have. I try to make time for reading, but I don't have as much time as I used to. But I enjoy Faulkner and Joyce, and JRPGs like Earthbound or some of the more RPG Maker ones that are just really flexible. Yeah, contemplative, but really flexible and really about just like challenging, the way you think from moment to moment, or setting up a really complex like weaving, way of looking at a perception or perspective is something that I also really enjoy in JRPGs. But you're only gonna really get that from indie works.
Yeah,
because it's more experimental.
And we have 2 more questions. From Chaban, which is a friend of mine. It's Kaisos under a pseudonym, the Little Twit. How would you say Wild Arms 1 compares to PSX RPGs? PlayStation 1 RPGs? This was directed at me, but feel free to answer. I think it's a little primitive, and not in a good way. It's a mess. It's a mess, but it's kind of enjoyable once you figure out how the mess works.
It's junk food. It's if you're gonna say JRPG trash, I would pick Wild Arms.
Yeah, it's a junk RPG.
Like the bit that really worked for me was the classic JRPG moment of now you can travel everywhere. So I went and travelled everywhere and got lost a lot of times, so I found places.
That happens so close to the end, though. I was
really
disappointed
with how little time we got to spend with the Gullwing.
Well, even when you get the ship, though, you're pretty free when you get the ship, and that was where I really kind of engaged with the world and went everywhere.
Yeah.
And it did, because the world is designed to feel big and to trick you into thinking it's bigger than it is. I really like that kind of expansiveness, and for an hour of play, I didn't mind it, and then I was really lost, and I did. But...
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting how the Gullwing is only for a vehicle to finish off the game, but not that interesting, so I'm not really going to talk about it.
I really liked how the Gullwing controlled, because it felt like you were flying a giant bird.
Except for the bit where it gets stuck on mountains.
Yeah, that's why it
was a prototype.
Yeah, that's the proto-wing.
It's a nice way of bringing that out mechanically, but also when it actually got stuck on mountains, it was really annoying.
Yeah, that was.
All right.
I don't know a lot about PlayStation RPGs. So
I think I've played most of Legend of Dragoon.
This is probably something Austin could answer.
Yeah.
Oh, well. But my absolute favorite is Persona 1, which is head and shoulders above this, and Final Fantasy 7 is head and shoulders above Wild Arms. They all have, they're all aware of what they're trying to do. They all try to evoke specific things. They're constructions with a purpose, and Wild Arms definitely is not.
Construction with a purpose: sell more PS1s.
Well, the purpose is to goof off and have fun. The purpose is, do you remember Dragon Quest? Well, here's Wild Arms, but that's not. Yeah.
Okay.
Next question
and final question: do you think you'll play any more games in the Wild Arms series in the future?
Yeah, actually, I want to play Wild Arms too.
Yeah, me too.
I'm really going to take some convincing to pick this up again.
That's completely fair. Because what attracted me to another Wild Arms game is I kind of want to see the train crash again. I want to see, I want to see all these things pile together that make no sense, that inform nothing. I kind of enjoyed just having a really amateur, dumb JRPG, but trapped in all these wrappings of really professional, like how you're supposed to do it, and then just flailing and failing at every single thing they're supposed to do. It was very entertaining.
I do want you guys to play more Wild Arms because I want to see you dunk on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
we're just gonna dunk
maybe
on
enjoy
it.
ourselves.
Yeah, I'm also.
You'll dunk on it either way.
Yeah.
The deepest part of me, like I wanna play Wild Arms 2, and I want it to be like the good parts of Wild Arms 1, without any of the things that contradict it. Or contradict. Oh my gosh, my cousin, contradict it or take away from it. I want him to like hit those notes and have it be a song instead of the cacophony that Wild Arms is. But I have no hope. I don't actually believe that's going to happen.
Yep. Well, we got to give it a shot. And
yep.
I paid 96 cents for it, so I'm good whenever you want to do that and do a mini episode on it.
Well, and Austin's going to talk about Wild Arms 5
potentially,
as well.
Well, he talked about it earlier, and he said he's finding that Wild Arms 5 has a lot of the same problems, and he's kind of just shaking his head at it. Whatever that means.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he only made it like 45 minutes into this, so...
I bet with all the Wild Arms, like, you cannot get a read on the game if you play even 10 hours of it, because it's going to just, like, change up everything, because it...
I played roughly 2/3 of Wild Arms 3, and it was kind of flat, and a lot of people enjoyed what level of flatness was going on, but I just was like, okay, so this isn't doing anything for me. And I was like 2/3 of the way through the game, so I stopped.
Yeah.
That's fair enough.
I was more compelled to stop in the early stages of Wild Arms 1 than later. Later on, I wasn't invested. I was just like curious, I guess. But in the beginning, I was just so put off. I wouldn't even be able to get in like the first couple of hours, honestly.
Yeah, it's you really need to push yourself until you have the means to cope with all the shit the game throws.
Once the prologue ends, it's almost enough. Like that funeral scene is actually It's one of the Wild Arms is full of like surprising moments where it's actually doing something and it's being emotional, and then you're like, wow, I want to see that again.
It definitely, like, the first half of the game was weaker than the second half.
Yeah.
I found it easier to keep going in the second half. The first half I bounced off a few times.
Yeah, I think that speaks to perhaps that's why there's a genre, like people have an issue with the genre. And Austin doesn't agree with me on this, I don't think. But like a lot of JRPGs have kind of an intermediary period where it's like you're waiting for the game to do the thing that's supposed to hook you. Because it never sets a hook within the first like hour. It gives you like a place to go or a reason to keep playing, but it doesn't actually like get your interest with a twist or anything until like a quarter or halfway through the game. And that's usually when it gets good.
It can be like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's more like it depends on the style of the game, but that is kind of the default mode. But it also like there's a lot of different things. Like you could start out playing Golden Sun and be really invested in doing the boyhood thing, and then you're already hooked at that point.
Yeah,
But JRPGs often happen to be games that are either padded or they do kind of conceal things, both like in its systems, like the combat, and in the story. And it sometimes takes a few hours before you're like, oh, I can do this. This is pretty fun. Why couldn't I do this before?
And I genuinely like the slow burn. Normally, it's just I've got to have some reason to think that we're burning towards something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I've got some idea that we're going somewhere. And Wild Arms at kind of 5 hours in, just like even though stuff had happened by that point, that looking back on it now, I can see why it worked and why it mattered and why it's relevant to what it was doing. At the time, it just felt flat.
Yeah,
it's not very. Wild Arms is not very good at selling you on when it does something that's good. It did that deliberately.
Yeah,
and even when like later when the twists come, that I like, we will sell them up as like empty points of where that Wild Arms kind of like revels in its flatness and barrenness in a kind of a self-aware way. They don't. You don't really know what's going to happen next, and the game doesn't really tell you why you're still playing. So each time that's kind of thrusted into you or taken away from you, you're kind of sitting there like, why am I playing this game?
Yeah. And I think the example I would use for the point where you have to get to the clincher, where it's either going to get your attention or you're going to stop playing, would be Tales of the Abyss. Because once you find out that Luke is not who he thinks he is, that's the point when the game changes and it gets good.
That although it gets good, but it also, like, that was the point at which I started really hating particular characters as well.
Yeah, like Jade.
Mostly Jade.
I've never played Abyss, but my brother has, and he's told me a lot of his frustrations with it. He never finished the game either.
Yeah.
Well, you should play it and finish it because it is actually really good.
Yeah, it's a
slow
little rough because it's Symphonia era Tales game, but like it's good. All right, so let's do the wrap up.
Well, hey.
Next episode preview. October, the spookiest month, is here, and so for our next game, DGC will be tackling the most terrifying thing of all: sincerity. We'll be playing Kingdom Hearts, originally a PS2 game, but available on PS3 as part of Kingdom Hearts 1.5 HD Remix. Joining us next time will be Jackson of AbnormalMapping.com. You can find them on Twitter at HeadFallsOff. We'll see you next time on Episode 3 of Dead Genre Chronicles. Ki Sora Sora.
It's a good one.
You realise we've forgotten to do any kind of plugging.
Yeah.
They know where to find us. We have a Libsyn for this.
That's
yeah,
true.
so you should find us and
But we do have a Libsyn, and also you should like put it on a blog or something.
Oh, and read all of our writing all at once. Just sit down and read all of it. I would like that.
It's all right. Like, I've not been around very long. I've only written 20,000 words of game script this year.
Yeah. All right. Find us on Twitter at JRPGsAreDead, at Eat the Pen, at Was Not Why Not, and at Invisifool. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.